Hi guys, this is lesson 2. Most of you are watching this while in class, and that is fine, but hopefully you are going to get something out of this and we can be done in about 10 minutes and we can move on. Today's main idea is what ideas about civic life informed the founding generation. You see today's objectives, which are explain the following terms: civic virtue, common good, state of nature, consent of the governed, and social contract. We're also essentially going to examine why people need a government, and that's what we're going to end up talking about in class over the next couple of days. So let's move on. What values influenced the founders? The founders were all white, rich men who came from educated backgrounds, but they had this sense of duty that historically we know about. They look at what's best for the United States or the colonies at that point. They look at 3 different ideas, and they look at the aspects of what's called classical republicanism. And this is not the Republican Party, but they look at ideas that are essentially going to be best for the common good or the best for society as a whole. And the first one is that small uniform communities are actually better for the security and the care of its people, or for the common good. Civic virtue is needed. People need to be willing to do what is right and what is their duty. In a republic or a place where we elect officials to represent us, we need to elect people with a lot of civic virtue. People like George Washington, people like Thomas Jefferson, people like Ben Franklin. And of course, those people are the ones that we know about in history. And the third thing is that we need to have moral education. We need to instill in our children a sense of duty, honor, and respect for our country. We're going to move on to why do we need a government? Essentially, we're going to look at 2 English philosophers here, John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. And we're also going to look at what's known as a state of nature. A state of nature is a condition where no government exists. There are no laws. People are just kind of wandering around, I guess, doing what they want. And John Locke really asked some key philosophical questions, those big idea questions. Essentially, what is human nature like? Are people good or evil? Naturally. What should be the main purpose of government? How do people who run the government get the right to government? Is it from God or is it from the people? What kinds of government should people support and obey? And then what kind of government should people resist? What are bad parts of government? And of course, we're looking at this through a state of nature. And again, state of nature is a condition in which no government or laws exist. He went on to form a theory called the natural rights theory. He determined that in a state of nature, people are born with certain inalienable rights, or rights that cannot be taken away. These rights are life, liberty, and property. Life, of course, people have the right to survive and live. Property or liberty, people want to be as free as possible, and they have the right to be as free as possible. And then property. This does not necessarily mean land or a house or a car or a boat or whatever. It means that people need and have the right to own the things that are necessary for their survival. We have these rights because we are human beings. We have these rights because we are humans, that we are created by God in His theory, and that they are not man-made. They are inalienable. They cannot be taken away. He also went so far as to say that people are driven by their own self-interest. He answered that first question, which is, how is human nature? And people have the need to protect their own natural rights. People have the need to protect their own self-interest. We have the need to be safe. We have the need to live how we want to live. And so because no one's human rights, natural rights would be safe in a state of nature, people enter into what's called a contract with the government, in that we give up a little bit of our freedom to get a little bit of protection. This is the consent to be governed. We give up our consent. We give our consent to the government so that they can protect our natural rights. And there you see the key term for consent of the governed, which is people govern themselves, or people give up the power or consent to be governed to the government. Thomas Hobbes was another English philosopher, and he looked at the social contract theory, and he really did argue for a state of nature as well. He said that because human nature is inherently bad, people will rise up to a war to protect their natural rights. Because of that, he said that continuous war would cause humans to leave the state of nature and enter into what's called a social contract with the government. And again, he looked at the consent of the governed, that people would consent to be governed so that they can maintain social order, stability, and peace, and protect our natural rights. He also argued that government must rule largely by fear, not fear instilled in its people, but in fear that if they don't, that the people don't consent to be governed, that this state of nature would exist again, and that people would, of course, die. So that's bad. John Locke, on the other hand, argued a social contract as well. He argued that in a state of nature, people are free and equal and rational, and that people have the right to punish those who do not respect others' natural rights. And in a social contract with the government, it is the government's responsibility to protect those natural rights. It is the government's responsibility to enact laws to protect those natural rights. Because, again, we are all in need of survival. And if the government doesn't exist in a state of nature, no one would survive. He also argued that because people give its freedom to be protected, if the government is not protecting or is not doing its job, it is the people's responsibility to replace it, even if that includes revolution. Lastly, I'm going to talk about some specific key terms. You see there, natural rights. You know those. I've also included pursuit of happiness, which we'll again talk about when we talk about the Declaration of Independence. I've included again popular sovereignty, which is the people hold the power. And there you see the right to revolution, which is again John Locke's idea that if the government doesn't do what it's supposed to do, we have the right to stand up and revolt. Limited government, again, there is a definition. The purpose of government is to serve and protect the rights of its people, and that limited government, or the government is limited. If it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, people can take it away. And then again, human equality, and this really goes against what was going on in Europe at the time with the God-given right to rule, or otherwise known as divine right, that everyone is free and equal to choose. There are no classes in the American colonies. We have no divine right. There is no one above anyone else. And so we see that we're going to see a sense of human equality in all reality, even though we're not. And that's where we're going to answer that question in class. Did the founders follow this idea? If so, how so? I hope you've enjoyed this, and once everybody gets finished, I will go on with class, and we will talk about the big ideas. See you later.